Hello and welcome to Elden Kings and Elden Ring Discussion. I am your host, Gideon the Half-Knowing, and joining me tonight is RageIkari. Say hi, Rage.
High Rage. Oh, it's never gonna be good.
But it never gets old, does it?
True, true.
So, Rage, I myself am fundamentally opposed to the monarchy and the church as ruling powers. History is a record of their atrocities.
That's fair.
But I love it when the chosen king reclaims his divine sword and leads his army in glorious battle.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into the Golden Order as a theocracy and ruling monarchy of the lands between in Elden Ring. It's quite the beast to overtake. There's a lot of little intricacies in their style. But what I'd like to get into to begin with is the interesting combination of the divine right of kings with the actual rule of gods and demigods. Rage,
Mhm.
what do you have to springboard off of this?
What do I have to springboard off of this? Well, the interesting thing with England. Oh my god. Oh, what a slip. No, with Elden Ring. The divine right of kings in England. Oh, what a concept. No, in Elden Ring is that not only is the divine right of the ruler like them as a ruler, it is literally them being a god and having the Elden Ring as their uh way of like influencing the land like metaphysically as well, right? Um, and so it is like as Elden Lord, we have some amount of strength once we get to that point in order to do that kind of stuff ourselves. But the real strength there is the God, the Elden Beast, the Elden Ring itself. But at the same time, it is a thing that we also know is not like perfectly divine and immutable. Like it's something that has changed. The Elden Ring has changed. It has somewhat changed hands. Like it's likely, at least, that it's changed hands. Um, and then there were Elden Lords and gods before this era with Marika, right?
So even though the king, just like the Lord, the Elden Lord in Elden Ring, just like the kings in
Mhm.
real life, rule through an attribution of themselves to higher power. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that because it sort of embodies this idea of the Elden Lord as a leader and shaper rather than owner or sole proprietor, I guess. Because you have this idea of the Lord is nothing without their goddess, the knight is nothing without their maiden. And you
Mhm.
can springboard from that into the maiden is nothing without the metaphysical power that they draw on, the Elden Ring, which is the Elden Beast. And to literally control it, to become lord of it, you must, I guess, tame it in a way. That's why we fight the Elden Beast at the end. But in taming the Elden Beast, in becoming lord over it, you leave a mark upon it. You know, we see Radigan's mark in that crosshatch sword pattern that pierces through the Elden Ring, or sewing
Mhm.
pattern, depending on your reading of the imagery. And before that, I mean, who knows? There's all of these different great runes that can be left on it. And afterwards, we see the very tangible aspect of our player leaving their mark upon the world.
Mhm.
It's almost
And
like a
that
king.
comes.
Oh, sorry, you go, you go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say that comes in the different types of rune we decide to use to fill the rest of the Elden Ring, if we decide to use any at all.
Absolutely. The Mending Rune, as they call it in
Mhm.
game. And it's like in this way you see the metaphysical impact of the Elden Lord upon the Elden Ring, but you also see the impact of like I began with the comparison. The king leaves their stamp on history in real life by influencing the people of the land. The Elden Lord influences both the people of the land and the metaphysical power of the land. In this way, you know, Elden Ring brings the fantastical to life. It brings all of these older mythological ideas into existence alongside our ideas of politics and everything. Uh,
Mhm.
and in that sense, it's interesting because you have one of these fantastical elements in Elden Ring, which is just extremely important to how everything plays out, and that's the idea of prophecy and fate. In real life, prophecy and fate might have been used as political tools to, control things. Like haruspices were very common in Rome. The oracle at Delphi was a major, not major, but was a power that influenced, like literal like rulers in ancient Greece.
Mhm.
And in Elden Ring, we see a real life prophecies, and we also see the thought control of these prophecies. The most famous of one being like that the Erd tree will one day burn, or that a tarnished will be lord. Like, you live in a world where magic exists, and magic says that the Elden Lord is king because they're the Elden Lord. But you also have this magic that goes directly in like contrary belief to the mandate of the Golden Order, even though the Golden Order rules by idea of its own divine purity, which I think is, it's an existing as a contradiction of itself. Like, like they
Mhm.
reject parts of themselves, even though those parts are like innate in a way that like can't be combated at philosophical thought. I'm sorry, I'm browbeating you with words. Rage. What are your opinions?
I think it's really interesting talking about fate specifically in Elden Ring. I think there's definitely we could very easily talk for several hours on the idea of like fate, predetermination, and actual free will in Elden Ring, and then therefore also in like the wider world and the way that like that shows up in religion, right?
Yeah,
Because in like real life in like a lot of different places there tends to be this idea of like you have free will but also simultaneously there's a fate, there's a path that's kind of like set out for you, and that those things don't really mesh together, right? And obviously in the game you have free will to a point, but at a certain point you still follow the main quest, you beat all of the main enemies, and you end up Elden Lord one way or another. The truth of your free will is really just which ending you choose and what you choose to do once you've filled all of the checkboxes, if that makes sense.
yeah. I think that's a really good way of putting it, and a really way of describing the resonance between the mechanics of the game and the narrative of the game. You have this idea where the guidance of grace is what like the tarnished follows on their quest, and that the guidance of grace isn't a forceful thing. It can be ignored or rejected or subverted, but you can never fully, like, as a player, you can't realize your own destiny without in some part adhering to the guidance, even if in some places you can manifest your own control, which like we see during the end of the game with the mending runes. Like, a lot of the side quests you go down, like Gold Mask or Thea or Rani or finding the frenzied flame, these are things that are outside of the purview of the greater will, and it's something that you do on top of your quest that's mandated by it. So like, you have the wiggle room within your own destiny. It's not everything is laid in stone, but there's still events that you cannot fully control. Do you agree with this, or is that going too far
I
in your
think
eyes?
I definitely agree with it, like in a way, and I mean that like I 100% agree that like there are definitely things that aren't in your control, but at the same time they're within your control because you have to choose to do them anyway, right? The only way that in Elden Ring, in like the only way in any game really to have true free will is to put down the controller and do something else. Like, and that's such a strange way of putting it, but there are very few at least games where you have entirely the free choice to do whatever you want, right? Because at a certain point you come to a roadblock where you have to do certain things in order to have other things get completed, right? um, and I think it's really interesting in Elden Ring also to note that like the fate that is prescribed to us is actively going against what the oracles tell you, right? At a certain point, you have to go off the beaten path. You do have to burn the Erd tree. And even though those are things that have been like prophesized, the prophecies, like other than Enya, there's like a general idea of like either we believe in you, you go do what you think is best. Enya kind of fits into that. Or otherwise, other than that, it's a no, don't burn the Erd tree. That's a terrible idea. What are you doing? Kind of thing. Like the Morgott kind of sentiment of we weren't meant to go this far. Our fate ends here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like we talked about in the earlier episodes, man's subservience to the gods. It's man's
Mhm.
subservience to fate, their willful obeisance to the lines set out for them, in like that they can't go beyond.
Mhm.
Hmm.
But yeah, and I think like the most interesting part about that is then if we begin to like take a tiny step back and look at like the real historical use of like prophecy and uh, fate and those kind of things, the majority of the time they are used as tools to incite faith in people, right? And by inciting faith, they don't need reasoning per se. And a lot of the time with prophecy, it's a very easy way for you to go work backwards from things to a certain point. Like, no matter what happens, there are a lot of prophecies that can be vague enough that, like, you could choose. Like, saying a tarnished will become Lord. If Godfrey beats us, Godfrey was tarnished, he becomes Lord again. There you go, right? We, as the Tarnished, fit so many different options. Like, there we go. Any of us could become Lord, and it would make sense, right?
And that's a core
Um,
part of the series. Like, going back as far
mhm,
as Demon Souls, you get the Crestfallen Warrior as an archetype, and the Crestfallen Warrior indicates to the player that they are just one of many, that the prophecy that they're undertaking isn't a you specifically will do this, but you as a person that arose from a group of people will achieve this. Anyone can
mhm,
do it. It's expected to happen because of the state of the world or because of like divine foresight, but it's not something that's expected of you specifically. You're just the person who has, by luck of fate or other means, achieved this. In the
mhm,
earlier in Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls, it's really just you, but in Elden Ring, I think there's a further encapsulation, like you were describing with the Cardinal Sin, where you're sort of operating outside of the fate of the greater will, and that's where like Melina comes in, because Melina isn't something that was ordained by the Two Fingers or greater will or expected by them. She's put into the game, put into the scene by Marika to ensure that a Tarnished will be powerful enough. Like, can you imagine trying to do all of Elden Ring without leveling up, without Melina's help? That's a much different
mm,
game.
mm. And there is the also the big problem of like without Melina's help, you actually can't beat the game. You can't get into Leyendell, uh, because you can't go to the Two Fingers and do all of that stuff, like in the Round Table Hall specifically. And so, as much as you'd love to be able to not do that and it'd be a cool challenge, you actually just physically can't. And I think it's interesting when we look at fate and how fate is used in Elden Ring, especially with like some of the other games in mind. There's almost like this level of like fate is stagnated, the prophecies are all stuck, and there's something that needs to like push things forward to allow things to become what they need to eventually. And I think this is an interesting thing I'd like to kind of like bring in the ideas of like the laws of causality and then regression. They're kind of like this idea of everything splits apart with the causality. No matter like whichever choice you take, everything begins to branch out like a tree, and then with regression, everything begins to come back together. And I think the interesting thing I always love to note with causality and regression is that the cycle of causality and regression is not only something to be pointed out when it comes to like Mikola and all of these other things, specifically with the whole the my brain is the double helix, sorry, where it goes out and then it comes back in, but also a tree quite literally does that like to a certain point, right? Where the roots are all spread out, the branches are all spread out, but there's usually a single pillar in the middle that is everything comes back into and then comes back out again. Like if you were to stack trees in a way, you'd get like the same cycle. And I think like it's a really good example of like how that works in Elden Ring and then like throughout this whole idea in general, where everything's regressed to a point, right? Or it needs to regress to where it all comes in and it's all got stuck and it still needs that one thing to push it all through. Everything's collected around that central trunk. And then as you play the game, your choices balloon out and then come back in at the end. where you then get to have them balloon out when you choose at the very end, right? Like that last run of bosses that you fight, you have to fight them in that order. You can choose to go do other things in the meantime, but you like you fight the Godskin duo, then you fight Malekith, then you fight Gideon, then you fight Horalu, and then you fight Radagon and Elden Beast, right? And you can choose again to go do whatever you so wish in the meantime, but that single string of like bosses, they all tie the end of the game together. They're like I think you can even go further back to Fire Giant because it's a very easy like point of like siphoning you into this one like thing. If you just keep going forward from that point in the game, you'll just get to the end of the game and you'll finish it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can definitely see what you're saying, and it's interesting how like you can apply that idea to so many different layers of the game. I think my mind always goes to like the metaphorical side of it, like
Mm-hmm.
this idea of you like you described it, events ballooning out from each other. The butterfly effect or whatever. How one instance of something happening can cause a number of other, sometimes foreseen and others unforeseen, events to occur. But how I think it also speaks to this idea of how history repeats itself over time. Even though
Mm-hmm.
things can change so much, even though causality can cause us to fracture so far away from what we originally were, there exists within us an innate yearning to return to what we were before. And in that innate yearning, you see this idea of repeating the same mistakes or repeating the same ideas. It's like the human condition in a way. Like humans will
Mm-hmm.
always go through the same cycles of grief and trauma and need and necessity. And I just sort of I think that's really interesting. Like because you even see that in FromSoft's own methods of narrative storytelling. In Bloodborne, I think it's the easiest way to describe it because you have these very clear examples of the beast and kin conflict repeating itself. First, you start with Iz and Loran, in the ancient desert, and the Iz people ascend, and the Loran people turn into beasts from the plague. And then you move on to Thumaru, where there's a conflict between the ascended Great Ones and their control over the church, versus the Yarnamites, who believe in, Yarnam as an icon rather than the Great Ones. And then you see it echo out once again in Yarnam itself during the events of Bloodborne, between the healing church, once again controlled by the Great Ones. Well, it gets complicated. But,
Mm-hmm.
like, I think that they do this wonderful idea of things get complex, things go back to the yeah. It's a wonderful mode of storytelling, and I find it sort of fascinating that they wrote it into the key components of how their setting works in Elden Ring's
Mm-hmm.
case, because there's so many ideas of that represented in the Erd Tree itself, and how the order of like the Golden Order itself is fractured, and perhaps it needs to regress to where it was before. I mean, that's what the Frenzied Flame believes, at least.
Mm-hmm.
What are
It's
your
also what
thoughts on this?
Rykard. Yeah, sorry. It also is like what Rykard believes to some extent, where devour the gods, devour everything, will all become one, and then eventually things can split out again later, potentially. We don't know if he's expecting it to split out again, but he wants them all to become one again, right? Um, but I think the interesting thing is, like, as you were mentioning, it's not just with Bloodborne to some extent. I think it's also this, like, iterative storytelling through all of the games in, well, most of them at least in FromSoft's history. We can say for sure, like, the Dark Souls games as well, where, like, all of those are built around cycles. And, like, I think one of the reasons why so many, like, it's so easy for people who were into the Dark Souls games to come to Elden Ring, as well in certain ways is that like um those games have very similar storytelling styles in a way, and those cycles are still repeating even in Elden Ring, right? But it's just a different version of those things, which is why I mentioned like it being iterative. But I think like the really interesting part to me in this is that like Elden Ring as a whole, like the entire nature of so many of these different characters is that they recognize that like this cycle exists, and they're not really able to break out of it, to the point where just like as a thought, like the sigil on the back of Melania's cloak is it's like a based around the Celtic tree of life, but also based around like yew trees specifically, because like yew trees and there's a couple of other trees that do this. They can sag to a point where they're I'm just obsessed with trees. I'm sorry. I've got to keep explaining about trees. They can sag at the ends of their branches to the point where their branches hit ground and can start growing roots again, right? And it's almost like this indication of like knowledge in the cycle coming back round, touching back down into those roots, and then repeating itself, right? And I think that like that's so fascinating that there are so many characters who are just they know that like they've been stuck in this shattering war for so long, right? And they know that there are things that have repeated themselves and things that they're stuck doing, and there's not really much that they can do to break out of it.
If you look at the undead nobles, especially the ones that are in Aegil's Lake, but like all of them that wander the lands between almost aimlessly, you see that sort of
Mm-hmm.
forlorn, like, resignment to their fate. They know that they're supposed to follow the guidance of grace to the Elden Ring. You even find some of them right outside of Leyndell's gates, still trying to get in, still trying to follow their
Mm-hmm.
duty. But they're so haplessly broken and weak that they'll never succeed. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Perhaps as something to springboard off of from this talk of
Mm-hmm.
causality and regression. I love the tree lore, by the way. It's so good. I didn't know that about you trees. I think that something to springboard off of is that, like I said before, the Golden Order is fractured. There's issues within it, and this was known by the people of the Golden Order. Like, their own internal response to their own issues is really interesting. It's sort of where it's what I mentioned before with the thought control behind the prophecies. Like, the Two Fingers are these benefactors, these great orators, these guide these people that grant guidance to warriors. There'd be people from all across the lands between that would come to the Two Fingers for their wisdom. And it sets up this idea that like the church is respected, the church is wise. But
Mm-hmm.
anyone who rejects the Two Fingers wisdom is called by the confessors, who also serve the Two Fingers. It's like the shadow. Whoever denies their wisdom is killed. Whoever foretells a prophecy that is unwanted is banished and exiled, and sometimes have their eyes blindfolded or put out, or by like the briars. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and you see in this like the fractured order, and I think the most core way to describe this own internal, like outside of the Two Fingers, by the people, their own internal response to these heresies is what you see in like the Golden Order fundamentalists, with D, for instance. You know, one of the more
Mm.
hated characters of the game outside of like Celavis or Gowry.
All my homies hate D. And I think it's really interesting because I was looking into Roger recently, and he has this like very specific like sentence at the end of him talking about the corpse under Stormveil, where he says, "The world has grown crooked, and if you intend to put it to rights, you'd better understand what happened to make it this way." Hmm? And I think it's interesting because like there is a level of even those within the Golden Order, probably most of all, a lot of the people who are like Golden Order fundamentalists or well, like a little bit more obsessed than like actually faithful. Um, there's a feeling of like they don't fully understand how the world has grown crooked, and so they're kind of just reaching to the first thing that seems reasonable and fixing things. Right? It's very very easy in a situation that is like to just go to the first point of authority and stick to that, if that makes sense, right?
It's such a perfect example, honestly. Like, Roger's questline is so explicitly associated with D for that very reason. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
he mentions his past with D, how they explored the secrets of death together and sought to understand the order. Like, Roger recognizes that the world is crooked the same way that D believes the world is crooked, but where their paths diverged is in learning more about the nature of those who live within death, where Dee wanted to
Mhm.
accept the simple answer of just destroying them. Perhaps he was so craving of a simple answer because the Golden Order was his only refuge. Like, you learned that Dee was not accepted anywhere else among any other people because of the circumstances of, like, the twins' birth. Uh, you see why he might fearfully accept their dogmatic teachings and be one of the
Mhm.
sole people still enacting them in the lands between, when most of the other Golden Order fundamentalists seem to have, like, died out. And then that's opposed to Roger, who gives up his very life. He's not fearful of his place in society. Rather, if you, like, look at his armor set, it says that he just was fearful of his own raging emotions. And, like, I think it just speaks to, like, how injured people might both react in different circumstances to these types of
Mhm.
situations. Like, it's of course it's a fantastical story about hunting undead and whatnot, but there's like a there's a deep emotional tie-in to it that makes these characters resonate.
Mm. And I think like the best part about that as well is that like we know that that was intended because not only does it happen between Rogier and Dee in this way, but it also happens between Morgott and Moog. You've got two kids, twins, both shunned by the Golden Order, and Morgott's answer to that is to become the Golden Order lapdog, do his best, be his most vigilant to keep the Golden Order, to keep Leyendell, to keep his mother's will as best as possible, even to the point where he's stood outside of the Erd tree. He's seen everybody else disperse and do their own shit. He calls them traitors, and then when he's outside the Erd tree, he's not allowed in. He is forsaken just as much, right? What he does is he seals up his curse and he does his best to be the perfect child, even though he can't be, because in his very birth he was never allowed to be the perfect child, right? Moog, however, takes that hurt, that pain, and what does he do with it? He finds something entirely different, entirely heretical from the Golden Order's point of view, and he embraces it with open arms because what he's done is he's taken the abuse that he's like been dealt out elsewhere, like from the Golden Order, taken the first thing that gave him a loving hand and went, yeah, this is what life is about, right? Like, this is the only way I can prove that I'm worthy by like accepting the first thing that came to me, right? Um, and I think like okay, maybe that's a little bit of like a false equivalency right there at the end there, but I think the duality of those characters is really important for understanding just how people respond to the Golden Order and how the Golden Order is fundamentally broken.
Yeah, no, I mean, once again, what an amazing example, you know? I think that the Omen are such a perfect encapsulation of so much that is wrong with the Golden Order. You see a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better word, like minority groups that live under the Golden Order in an oppressed state. You see this in the Elven Oryx or the Misbegotten, or like even just like
Mhm.
the common people under the demigods. Even I mean that's not minority anymore. But like the Omen especially are these people who are twisted humans. They're not like the Misbegotten where it's a state of being that is natural but is vilified. The Omen are
Mhm.
very realistically haunted and cursed. Like that's they are haunted by evil spirits, and the like ulcers that grow through their body also grow through their spirits, if the Dung Eater's curse is to be related to the Omen at all, which I think that there's
Mhm.
enough similarities there along with rot and ulceration in general that it's a worthwhile comparison. And in this way you see how like the Omen are born this way because they are born of a fractured order, because the Erd tree is imperfect. But rather than addressing the imperfection of the Erd tree, the people would rather shun signs that it's imperfect. Which is. It's fascinating. It's so sad. It's so real. That, like, there's an issue in
Mhm.
society, an issue deep into society, and rather than fixing that issue, people would rather find a scapegoat for it. You know, the Omen are named Omens because they're omens of the downfall of the Erd tree. At least that's how it reads to me. Like, why else? What else would... They're an omen of bad things, you know? They're vilified just because they exist. It's bad.
Yeah, and I think it's like also really interesting that like very specifically, I don't remember the specifics of it, but Roger also then going back to him mentions that, if I remember correctly, he mentions how the Golden Order used to be more like understanding and inclusive, and then it like came down to this, and he like talks about how he thinks we need more of the understanding and inclusivity in the future. Like, not having it is like actively harming the Golden Order. And I think it is really interesting because if you think about it, like the modus operandi, the like way that Marika has had to get her strength is by getting rid of absolutely everything that threatens her. Every single time, every single thing that she's done, or at least like from like one way of reading it, is that anytime there was a threat, you had two options: you destroy it or you assimilate it, and then once you've assimilated it, you destroy it. That happens at like every turn. Liurnia with RageIkari and the Carrions, the Fire Giants, potentially the Storm Lord and all of that, the Glowmide Queen potentially, and the Rune of Death, all of those things, it's assimilated and it's destroyed, or it's just destroyed. The Deathbirds, even as another example, with the Twin Bird God, and like the interesting thing there is that it worked, because once you've assimilated or destroyed something, it can't pose a threat to you. But as you're doing so, the snake is constantly devouring itself, because at every level, in order to to fight or destroy those people, you almost certainly would have had to have used or like been in like contact or worked with people earlier down the line who were with you. And again, this is really horribly real, right? Where like at a certain point, it keeps coming for the next person on the list, and the people further up the list assume that they're never going to be the person next on the list to get assimilated, like to get destroyed more accurately once they've been assimilated, but they do. And so eventually the Golden Order rips itself to shreds, because all of the people along the line they went, no, it's just this group of people, it's not going to be me. But then eventually it was them as well.
And eventually become you. Like, those who live within death are an easy example of fantasy versions of it. But like in the real world, like suddenly becoming disabled, or having a realization of something, or becoming ill, or just being grouped into a group of people by circumstances of your birth, you know, like you have these ideas of like, it might not be you today, but it could become you. Yeah.
And it brings up a quote that I'm not gonna like talk about for too long, because you know these people don't really deserve like too much of like the people who said the quote as well, like to some extent, but most importantly the people the quote is about don't deserve too much of our time. But Germany 1940s, the idea that first it was one group of people, then it was the next, and we assumed that it wouldn't be us, and then eventually it became us. And the thing truly did become that with the Golden Order, it was always somebody until eventually you run out of people to point the gun at, basically. And then, like, once you start looking more introspectively and start pointing the gun at people within your own ranks, you might find strength in the people who you have left, but you're gonna have less people, and all you have left is fear, really.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, not to spend too much time on it, but reactionary politics is a serpent that will eat its own tail. It is not a stable belief or ideology. I think, you know, to get us back into like Elden Ring talk and away from a fantastic quote by Martin Niemöller. I don't know how to say his last name, honestly. You just like, Where to jump in at? uh,
I feel like going back maybe to causality and regression might be a good place.
mm-hmm.
And the reason like I wanted to go back to causality and regression is purely just the whole idea of the Golden Order in and of itself. The place where, if I remember correctly, we get both of these spells. At least one of these spells is Gideon.
Law of causality is from Gideon. Law of regression is from the Golden Order Principia, which that name has a bunch of baggage all on its own because of hermeticism, and that's so like which is interesting. Like Gideon learns the law of causality from the two fingers, and it gives him knowledge of why the Erd Tree is the way it is and why the Golden Order is the way it is, and that informs him on why he opposes you alongside his knowledge of Merrick as well. Whereas the law of regression is something that's been recorded within the Golden Order Principia, within one of their holiest books for who knows how long, and it's like a key part of the Golden Order fundamentally. I think that's an interesting dichotomy in finding
them. And the Principia, if I'm not mistaken, is from somebody hanging just above Gideon's arena, right?
Yeah.
They're sat in a chair, if I remember correctly.
It's a really funky chair.
Something like that.
I don't know why it's up there.
But I think it's I think the positioning is really important because that is, firstly, Golden Godfrey's arena. As like the first Elden Lord, this golden apparition of someone who once was as a leader of the Golden Order, but was then tarnished and stripped of all grace. But then also Gideon's arena as well, and it's so interesting because it's literally right there in front of him, and his entire worldview doesn't get like entirely destroyed by it, because I think you can still see regression and still have the worldview that he has, that like the tarnished are there to fight, like they're to struggle for eternity, right? Because it kind of completes the cycle in a way. But I think the thing that like I think the law of regression is almost the thing that's missing from what he's saying, right? There's a way of like almost refuting that, like, yeah, causality, all of these choices have led to a certain place, and they are meant to keep going and like as they are, right? And so if you follow causality around in the cycle, you just keep going round and round and round forever, right? But the idea of regression as well being this thing where you go from we're meant to go forward, but also that the cycle is meant to go backwards. It's meant to pull things like together again. We're not just meant to all spread out, destroy each other and hate each other. We're also meant to come back together and still see the purpose of like people, individuals being not just individuals but a part of that whole and still having value as both, right? And I think like with Gideon specifically, I think it's really, really interesting, just the idea, his like whole philosophy of that you are meant to struggle on for eternity, and he's seen you go through and kill all of the other like the demigods, and still sits there in front of you and goes, it is my my job to stop you going any further, is such an interesting choice.
I adore it. I love it on so many levels. I love Gideon. He willfully lets you go about your business the entire time. Like, he is your he's your strongest living and cognizant rival in the Lands Between that's actively obeying the Two Fingers in some capacity. Like, the only other person that even comes close to that level of strength, I feel like, is like Bernal. That's also tarnished. I can't think, like, Millicent's not tarnished. She doesn't count. Like, she's the only one that, Alexander's not tarnished. So you have this person who watches you go through the game. He even sort of helps you with his own sort of honor. He's doing his own thing. He has his own projects. And when it all comes down to it, like, what he's doing is he's trying to cram as much of the knowledge of Landel and the Round Table hold into his head as he can, because he knows that once a Tarnished becomes Lord, it's all going up in flames. And when it does go up in flames, he goes to Landel, because that's where he knows the Tarnished will go. He meets with Godfrey, he has he would have acknowledged as his liege lord even before Godfrey was banished the first time. And he doesn't go into conflict with him. He doesn't pursue lordship. He gives Godfrey more time with his son, at the end of the battle while he fights you. And, like, that might not be the core reason of why he fights. Like, he has this dialogue about fighting on into eternity that you talk about. And he has this, like, sort of nihilistic view on the world because of what he's seen of Marika's desires for it. And I love how you use like the regression as the antithesis to it, because if you look at Marika and Radagon as two characters that represent the different sides of the Golden Order, like the push and pull of it, then Marika is causality. Marika is the fracturing onward. It's her choices that give the world a chance at a new identity, at a new existence. And it's Radigan who keeps trying to regress things to himself. He's grasping at straws. He keeps trying to keep things the way they are. And I think he sort of, to go back to his crosshatch pattern design, just go back to like Radigan's identity as as the leal hound of the Golden Order, as like an inquisitor of the Golden Order. You see how, I don't know, you see how a lot of metaphorical lines come together with the causality and regression dichotomy.
I think like that. I love that, and I think I especially love it with like causality and regression as those two characters. And I think like their great runes, like, well, not necessarily. I like the idea of Radagon's one, but I think Marika's one almost makes even more sense, especially with the DLC story trailer in mind, right? Like when she's holding up all of those like threads that become her as the great rune. It is literally a like in the way I see it, right? It is her being the vessel to spread those threads across both ways, right? Like if you look at her great rune design, like the line into the rune arc at the top, be as like the splitting and the convergence that is causality. I think that's perfect. And I think it's also so interesting that Law of Regression specifically reveals mimicry in all forms, right? Because the idea of Marika being this like almost like a lot of like the mimic veil, and like the idea of Marika is that she works in the shadows. She has these like magics that hide and veil and shift things, right? Whereas Radagon is, I have a hammer, I hit you. And it's the revelation, the like ability to pull all of Marika's bullshit away in a way, and just be as like it regresses down to like I hit things, right? Because I think it's so interesting specifically with Radagon that he is like he knows all of these incantations. He knows all of these he's like his intelligence and his faith. He is both of those things. He's striving to be whole by learning everything, but it is at the same time like he comes back to during the last fight. He throws some stuff at you, but mostly he whacks you with a hammer, right? It's like this is a bit silly, but it's just that meme of like 99 strength build, unga bunga, and then 99 int build, and it's just the hammer spell. I've forgotten the name of it, but it's I unga, therefore I bunga. Like despite like having this entirely different like take on everything, you come back to the thing that you were originally doing. You come back to that like basic thing because eventually all things come full circle and you still regress, right?
Yeah. Speaking of Radigan as a symbol of balance for the Order, something I find interesting is that when you look at his statues, he is performing the Golden Order totality pose, where he has both arms outstretched on either side of him. It's an example of his personal desire for balance, and it's explicitly sort of different than Marika's pose, which is more so, I guess, to me reads as like a sort of more symbolic of like her as a vessel of the Elden Ring, her performing a service to her people, or a sacrifice, even if you relate it to like the idea of the cross, and you do see people crucified in that same position, in honor of her, or perhaps in like condemnment of these people's sacrifices or punishment. So it's interesting the irony of Radigan aspiring to be full and how that fails. I guess. Is there anything that
Mm.
you does that what do you think of that? I guess.
Oh, you've opened an entire can of worms. This is one of the things that I've been like rotting over and trying to it's like the second thing on my list of things I want to write about before the DLC. So I'm not going to go too deep into it because I might just do a video of it on my own. But the like Golden Order totality is like this. It is an intersection between two different things in and of itself, and Radagon doing the pose is also, I think, an intersection between those two things, because Golden Order totality is like when you have like one arm one direction and then one arm like bent. There is a gesture like there's the two gestures, inner order and outer order, right? So having Golden Order totality, the idea of that in my head is that it's trying to be both inner order and outer order, but by doing both you lose out on something because you don't have the bent arm, right? And I think the other side of that is then when we look at like Marika's like rune and then the rune of death. If we take Marika's rune as meant to be like her as being this vessel, but also being like life, right? Like it's the rune arc which was there to like hold the blessed dew as it dropped. And then the rune of death being the upside, like the like other way round, like Radagon making that pose, not being tilted upwards like Marika or tilted down like the rune of death, is like that in between. It's entire again. It's intending to be both, and by proxy doesn't become anything. And like Radagon is this like fascinating character where he is like, as I mentioned already, sorcery and incantation, but again he comes off being sort of neither, and he has all of this strength, but yet he kind of amounts to almost nothing of it, right? Like he's such a fascinating character to me because it feels like Leal Hound of the Golden Order. He's chasing his tail constantly, trying to be something, and in that process of like fitting that middle ground and never truly being anything, he ends up never truly being anything by just doing the things that he like thinks is going to allow him to become something, but is too like it's never an actual choice. It's always that central. I'm in between it. I'm the cross hatching instead of like an actual like of one way, right? I'm both, and by being both, he's almost like resigning himself to nothing.
Hmm. So do you think it's an impossible idea then, that kind of balance?
The thing is, right, I don't think it's impossible, but because of the way like Elden Ring like I think tries to explain itself, is that the way I see it is, if it's in a cycle, if this moment of being in between is in the cycle, then it needs to be a moment. It needs to be a passing pathway, right? Like, there's the whole idea. Again, I don't know this perfectly. I'm not Buddhist, and I also like haven't done as much research as I probably could. So if I'm chatting shit, please let me know. But the idea of the like becoming the in between of stagnant water and flowing water, being both like still but also being able to be constantly changing and moving, the perfect place to be is both at the same time but also simultaneously moving through both of them. It's like the idea of like becoming like enlightened. It's never a permanent state as far as I understand. It's moments of enlightenment like dotted through a life, right? Like Radagon very clearly could have like experienced those same moments. There were moments where he had true highs with sorcery and potentially true highs with his incantations. He had those true highs with being life and being death, right? But in choosing to try and be both and holding on to both of those things, he almost stops himself being able to continue that cycle of being one and then the other, cycling back and forth between them and allowing himself those times of like enlightenment in between,
And
right?
that's generally the sin that gets committed in these games. That the
Mm-hmm.
inability to let go. You know, like If you look at Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2's recontextualization of the act, you have Gwyn commit the first sin where he links the flame and sets the Dark Souls universe on this endless world of endless cycles. If you look in Sekiro, the thing that's causing issues with the world is the stagnation of the dragon's heritage, which grants immortality, and immortality creates something that men will covet and fight over forevermore for as long as immortality is a thing to fight over. And then you see it again in Elden Ring, where you have this idea of America wanted to create a perfect order that had banished death and that was perfectly balanced. Golden in a way represents a sort of balance, but like one of the inherent counterparts to Golden representing balance is that if gold represents balance, then what is silver? If silver also exists, night must exist within day. Like it has to be a cycle, like you say. And in trying to achieve this idea of permanence, you see that fade away. You see how Radigan is the primary antagonist of the game because he's the one that has engineered the stagnation of the world the most by trying to reforge the Elden Ring and failing at it. So I do agree. Some parts of your interpretation of Radigan I feel like may have been a bit harsh, but I do think that like the idea of perfection as a transient concept of enlightenment never being a permanent thing, like that's a very real world thing to discuss. Like it's one of the reasons why religion, at least in my opinion, doesn't work if it becomes dogmatic, because anything that becomes dogma loses the original spiritualist connection that it first had. It's why having like a prophet or an apostle, though I feel like those people are so much better in their beliefs than just following the rewritten dogma of one. I guess I don't know. I always find myself being personally inspired by the personal words and ideas of a person rather than the reinterpreted ideas as it just gets spit out down the line. I don't know.
Yeah, I also agree, and I think like I also wanted to just like bring back to this whole idea as well, because I think it's also encapsulated really well with Radagon's Rings of Light. And I'm going to say, like, I know that I'm quite harsh on Radagon. I love him as a character, but also I think it's because I've delved so deeply into the Miquella rabbit hole, right? That like the whole idea of like Miquella doing his best to try and fix Malenia, going through all of these things with like Radagon and like showing Radagon all of these like different Rings of Light spells, like them back and forth between them. And then Radagon's final gift is the Rings of Light, right? Like it reads a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father Radagon, the Golden Rings of Light. It's a big circle around you, and you do the Golden Order totality, right? Like, and it comes in the Golden Order Principia as well, right? Which is like, so it's part of all of these things, like wholeheartedly. But it's just a big ring around you, and I think it very clearly exemplifies like the idea of Radagon being like, I can be both. Big ring around me, I am this thing, right? And yet, it mentions at the bottom, the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Malenia's accursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. And his unalloyed gold needle, rather than being like something entirely circular, it's that double helix that comes down to a point, right? I think it represents the constant movement between causality and regression. You have the point at the very end, and then you have the flare out at the very top, and all the way down it's looping back and forth between itself. So whereas like Radagon's Rings of Light is purely just one circular single thing, Miquella's ideology is it is the pulling of things together, and it is the spreading out of things as well. He is like not to just like entirely be like, oh my god, Miquella's the best, but like the entire concept of the ideology is trying to be both in a way that is a lot more inclusive, a lot more able to understand the transient nature of a lot of these things. And it really does just feel like he took both aspects from his mother and his father and tried to make them into something that would work. Obviously, that didn't work, or at least it did to a certain point, and then he realized he had to abandon it entirely, potentially, with his own fate, with his own body, all of these other things, right? And I think, like, I just find it so fascinating reading the Rings of Light spells and how they had this back and forth, and it results in Mikola having to abandon fundamentalism because it is just broken. It can't do the things that, like, he needed it to do, and it doesn't truly, like, get, like, it I don't know how to put it other than, like, it thinks it's more clever than it is, in a way.
You say that, but I'm not sure if I can fully agree with it. I think that
Okay.
Golden Order fundamentalism falls prey to dogma, as we see with the hunters of those who live within death. But we also see from our third major Golden fundamentalist character, Goldmask, that there are tenets to the Order that are academically oriented on exploring the nature of the Order from an balanced and mathematical standpoint. It's why you see this idea of Goldmask being so focused on balance and, more importantly, on interpretation. You know, he is, you know, we've talked before about how the guidance of grace is, it can be more than just what our player sees. It has a lot more properties to it. And Goldmask is a good representation of this, because all Goldmask has to do to contemplate theology and the nature of the Elden Ring is to look at the Erde Tree, which houses the Elden Ring and which shines with its golden light. And by examining the Erde Tree, he's able to look into the depths of the Order. We don't really learn much about how that works for him, but the best example of it is that when he gets to Landel, and just to clarify on his three positions that he takes, he starts, you know, to the left in Altus, then he moves to Landel, and then he moves to the right in the mountaintops, and in doing so he sees both halves of the Order. He sees the left and right side to achieve the totality gesture that he has upon his revelation at the end, near the end of his quest line. But you also see this idea in Landel, to go back to interpretation of the rays of the Erde Tree, that he notices, just by looking at the Erde Tree, that Radigan is God when he shouldn't be. He learns something fundamentally core to how the Golden Order is. A secret that not many people know at all. And from that secret, the only thing that can explain it is that Radigan is Marika. That there's only one god of the Order, and the reason Radigan appears as god is because Radigan is Marika, who is the one god of the Order. And the further implications of that, it's just like Corhin says. He doesn't understand. Like Corhin, like maybe Goldmask comes to a conclusion. He does actually come to a conclusion at the end of his questline in Ash and Landel, which is what creates the Mending Rune. But anyway, I'm going on this long tangent and explanation just because I think that Golden Order fundamentalism, like every other belief system that's posed within Elden Ring, it has its own failings with its own successes. I know that I myself am America apologist and a dirty centrist and a disgusting liberal, or I'm not those things. I don't actually like liberals. Well, okay, we're going too deeply into it. Liberals are fine in a way. We should maybe not tolerate ongoing genocide at times. Anyway, I think that, you know, Mikola has his own failings, Rani has her own failings, Golden Order fundamentalism has its own failings, but in all of those failings is a way to learn from them and achieve success. And, once again, I'm vomiting information at you. What are your thoughts on this?
You know, I think you're very correct when it comes to, I think it's fair to disagree with me, because I think the way that I was going about, like, explaining that, I think it's true, but it's also not the only truth, right? Like, Radagon and the Golden Order failing is true, and them failing Mikola is true, but it doesn't mean that the Golden Order is entirely a failure as such, right? And I think, like, the important thing, like, I'm taking away from that as well is that, like like as you mentioned, like Goldmask is able to see that there is things that are broken there, but there's a way to fix it as well, right? And I think that's really, really interesting from like a just in general, right? Like there are many things in the world that are broken but can be fixed. There are many things in the world that like fundamentally need to be destroyed and so that they can be rebuilt, right? But like those two things don't mean that like everything that was there was bad. Everything that was there was entirely wrong. There are some cases where that's the case, right? But like the Golden Order in its like creation had parts there that were well intentioned, that were good, there was use to it, and it was able to bring a lot of different factions together, even if that was not necessarily like in ways that they intended, right? And while like the Golden Order isn't able to fix like Miquella and Melania, right? That doesn't mean that they weren't also still like important and relevant to Miquella and Melania and their stories, and they were there to teach Miquella and Melania stuff that was really important, right? And I think like when it comes to Marika as well, I think like that again, there's a lot there that you can easily construe as like in a negative light, right? But at the same time, she still did a lot that was potentially like easily like understandable as good, even if there was still a lot of bad there on top of it, right? And I think that's true of the majority of characters in the game. I think you can very easily look at every single demigod, every single like hero and NPC, and there's like only a handful of them where you can genuinely say that all of the things that they did were for good, right? I think Goldmask might be one of them.
I think
Maybe.
that goes back to like, if we're going to go back to the very far back 2 years ago release time of the game, there were interviews going around where Miyazaki described some of the design process behind the game, and part of it was George Martin writing these noble characters who had like these actually like sometimes like worthy ideologies that they had a good cause to fight for, and then Miyazaki would take these ideologies and he'd corrupt them. Like we have people that were shitters from the beginning, like Godric, who fathered a bunch of bastards and didn't have any sort of legitimate claim to anything besides his bloodline. But like you see other people like Rykard saw himself as above the war. He didn't want to partake in something that he saw as evil and as manipulative, so he tried to stand above it. Radahn is continually vilified, and sometimes for like a good reason, because he was just an unquestioningly loyal general of the Golden Order. But at the same time, there's something to be like respected about the values someone might have in personal prowess and honor and strength, and like how those tenets that Radahn held are examined, are seen in his army, are reflected in his army. And we talked about that last episode with how the two greatest people, like the two people that hold the highest honor, are a Crucible Knight who has all of the prestige and recognition that would earn him like a knight that place of honor, but then there's also a Leonine Misbegotten. So it's clear that while prestige and renown and strength of arm, like prestige and renown is important, strength of arms is what matters most to him. And I mean, it's a conflict-driven ideology, but what we see in a lot of like the Golden Order is like that value of strength and integrity, and that's sort of like not just something that's held by the Golden Order, which over time rejects strength, which is why they like vilify the Crucible Knights, but it's seen in like the overall worldview of how the Lands Between sort of inherently exists. Like, strength befits a crown. Only the strongest person can tame the Elden Beast and become Elden Lord. Whatever the world state before Godfrey ruled, I feel like that would have informed his idea of strength befits a crown. Like, if you look at Godfrey before he took the crown and became Godfrey, he was Horalu, and he fought like an animal where he was barehanded and unarmored, but like he was very visibly stronger that way.
And I think like it's even more interesting when we do talk about like this Godfrey analogy specifically as a way for the Golden Order like to like how it works and how it always has worked. He was Horolu before. There was untamed strength, and what did they do in order to try and like keep like a tether on that? They put a lion on his back to keep him tamed. And by doing that, they gave him his armaments, they gave him all of these other things, and they basically tether him down in as a part of the Golden Order with all the bells and whistles. But in doing so, they basically force him to fit like a very specific thing, and it like actively weakens him, I think. And they do that, like, again, as you mentioned, with the Crucible Knights. They like squash that strength, and it happens like elsewhere as well. Like I think there's a potentially an argument to be had with the way that they dealt with the dragons and the way that they might have dealt with the giants, where like they saw a strength, they saw something. Like obviously there's like some level of like the dragons having attacked them first, but like it's potentially debatable when it came to the giants whether the Golden Order attacked first or not. Well, not necessarily that the dragons attacked first even, but the dragons attacked Leyendell like directly. It's very obvious that they did, right? But either way, like they are really good at taking that ancient version of strength and trying to squash it down. And there's almost like it's not necessarily even something that is like morally unjustified. It can be dependent on like your point of view, right? Like there is a level of like, even if you follow that like idea of might makes right, the way that like the Golden Order dealt with all of that is our might has to squash theirs so that their might can't make right on us later, right?
I think there's a truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also like another sort of metaphor being wrapped up in this idea of constrained evolution and control, or even just like centralization of governance, of religion, of philosophy, of common belief. Like, if you look at the prehistory as being defined by the Crucible, the previous iteration of the Elden Ring, then you see it defined by, you know, giants and misbegotten and like these powerful figures. And as you move away from the Crucible, which is symbolized by red, you move into this era of dignity and repose and intelligence and refinement, and this is where you get into the blue symbolism. It's erudite, you know, and you see this in Godfrey, where he's covered in blood in his second phase, where he's red, but like his cape in his first phase is purple or blue. You know, he embodies both aspects of this. And while there's a lot of negative connotations to restraining yourself, you know, I think that there is positive connotations to self-control. You know, there's a flip side to it. Like, Godfrey has an admirable quality to him in the fact that he willingly works with Sirash to become who he wants to be. He tries to fit the ideals of what he believes a leader should fit. Even if that does make him physically weaker. Like, you know, if there's a physical weakness, is there a mental strength? You know, you see that in the red health bar, the mental FP bar.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of... well, here, I have this item description pulled up. I think it's interesting.
Okay.
After it's from the Giant Crusher Hammer, something that Morgott wields spectrally, which is interesting. After the giants were quelled, and man turned against man in violence, this weapon was all but forgotten. Man has grown feeble in comparison to his forebears. And if you compare this to the Crucible being restrained into the Erd Tree, you see this idea of the Crucible as this wild, powerful energy. You know, the world before the Golden Order was bigger, it was larger than life. The remnants of its architecture are massive. There were giants, you know. But now in the world of the Golden Order, where the Crucible has become the Erd Tree, with the Age of Plenty, which was probably the Crucible's latent energy, still powering it, to the point where the Erd Tree healed all those around it, just with that power of the Age of Plenty, it fades away, and, you know, humans become smaller, they become more feeble. The true fire giants are all but dead except for one, and in their place only the lesser giants, the trolls, remain, and these trolls have become subservient to the Golden Order. You mentioned the ancient dragons, and once again, the ancient dragons are all but cold. They're no longer like these immortal stone beings that are lit by some internal flame. They've become mortal dragons. The only part of the mortal dragons that's still stone is their gravelstone hearts. That's it. Nothing else is at the same scale as the ancient dragons. The world has grown smaller, it's grown lesser, but it's become refined in a way. I don't know. It's it's interesting to me.
And I find that really interesting because then you've also got like, firstly, just to go over the like, if we go about like the idea of Godfrey's like actual battle, I think it's really interesting where he goes from the tender moment with Morgott, then fighting in that blue in a more refined but like potentially like weaker way, right? To then going like full Horaloo. In doing so, he like regresses to before to the person he was before, and like kills Sarosh in the cutscene, and then eventually he is defeated, right? And if you take that as like a it is the reverse of his history as a warrior, right? Like he was Horaloo, he then gained Sarosh, he then became Godfrey, and then he had children, and then he was tarnished and left, right? And his battle is returning to the the thrones just out front of the Erd Tree, having a moment with Sarosh, fighting you as Godfrey, killing Sarosh, and then having a moment with Morgott, sorry, not Sarosh, and then inevitably at the end turning into Horaloo and then dying. And I think it's a really beautiful way of just like seeing his moments of like, this is regression, firstly, I think is an interesting point, but also just like how, like as you mentioned, those colors, they really do embody across the game like those aspects, those ideas of like strength in and like the physicality in red, and then the mental aspect and the refinement in blue. And then when we go to like the ideas of the trolls, even there are carrion knight trolls that some of them are like summoned in blue, and some of them use glintstones, which are very like obviously blue, right? And then there are like the idea of like this primordial red as well. Like we look to the DLC, like Mesmer's flames are bright red, and he was this like he has the red snakes. I think he to some extent embodies that primordial strength as well, right? Obviously, I think there's going to be some level of like refinement to him as well, and like how we'll see that, we'll have to see in the DLC and everything, right? But like these ideas like aren't just like, they're applicable everywhere, and I think that like I really like that. I think
I agree. It really works well that Elden Ring set up so much of this like internal catalog of illusions and different symbolism that they can then further relate to in other media. Like I for one am very fascinated in how Mesmer's flame is going to relate to the dragons in the Crucible, if at all. I also think that the Carrion Knights are really, well, the Troll Knights, that is, are a really good example, because while the Golden Order Knights are these diminished, lesser beings of what they were, they're just servile. The Troll Knights are given, like, honor, they're given esteem, and they were some of the first to even fight with Renala. Yeah, it's so good. It's good shit.
It's really good. Okay, I feel like we've almost got to like just over an hour at this point, an hour 10ish. So I'm gonna do it this time. Are there any like final thoughts you wanna like mention before we end it, Gideon?
Oh, good question. Okay, here. Do you think that when the Tarnished takes the throne, and if they engage in another, age of the Golden Order, if they become an Elden Lord, do you think that that would begin a new Age of Plenty, in the similar way that, like, when you link the flame in Dark Souls, like, life flourishes anew? Do you think that, like, if the Age of Plenty was the Crucible's energies still being strong in the Erde Tree, and if the Erde Tree burnt because those Crucible energies were stoked by lighting the giant's flame, then do you think that they'd remain stoked for a bit of time before going back into, like, the embers that they're sort of assumed to be later on?
I think, personally, that the initialization of, like, specifically I'm going to talk about the Age of Fracture, which is the age of just completing the game, not getting any of the mending runes or anything, right? I think that age specifically will not start out with an Age of Plenty, but later it will be. And I think that's specifically because with the Erd Tree burning and the ashes falling, ashes are nutrients, just like straight up, right? And if you burn an area of land, it will burn away, it will be entirely barren for a while, and then later it will come back even more fertile and nutrient rich than it was before. And so I don't think it's going to be an initial Age of Plenty, but I think there's an Age of Plenty in the future of the Lands Between at some point, right? Because the Erd Tree, the thing that has been taking up all of these souls, all of these bodies in the heroes' graves, in, like, whatever, like, potentially the Crucible, those meat pillars in the story trailer, if those were all fed into the Erd Tree, and you can see how big and strong and, like, filled with nutrients it is, with that being burnt and then redispersed around the Lands Between, I think that there's no way that eventually that wouldn't allow the, everything to again regrow and become renewed, and an Age of Plenty to happen eventually. But I don't think that the Age of Fracture specifically just straight up ends, like, once you've got there, you've got an Age of Plenty there straight away, because Marika's body crumbles, and it's called the Age of Fracture specifically. The Elden Ring isn't entirely, like, renewed in that moment, and so I do think it would take time.
That's fair. I feel like one counterpoint would be in your definition of the Age of Plenty, where you focus on this idea of, like, the ash and the fertilization of the ground, which I think is, like, I really like that as, like, something to bring up, just because I do agree that would, be good for the farming industry.
Yeah.
But, like, I feel like the Age of Plenty is sort of more so almost defined by the, splendor and prosperity of the Erde Tree itself, where you get, like, the cerulean medallions, or the different amber medallions, where they have gemstones in them from when the Erde Tree freely flowed with sap, and how, like, the Erde Tree might have distributed the sacred tears that we see, or how the Erde Tree was said to have, like, healed people with its radiant light in a way similar to the warming stones that we find. I'm not sure if that informs your decision, or, like, opinion in any way. If you still disagree, that's totally valid. I just wanted to further explain my point.
No, I still feel like there is some level of, like, the Erd Tree potentially cracking and then, like, having the, like, amber, like, spread again as those things. And I think, like, I think it's very possible that there would be able to be one. I think it just comes down to, like, the mechanics of that, like the magic of all of that kind of stuff, and the actual, like, how that works in the moment, right? But I think, like, specifically the way I see it is that either the Erd Tree's burning for all of eternity, or as however long it takes for, like, it to burn out, right? Or it's still gonna be, like, burn it, like, some layer of it is gonna burn away, and then it's gonna be able to regrow, right? Because that, like, that's a thing that people do. Sometimes you burn parts of trees in order to, like, allow them the ability to grow, because trees need to prune in order for the parts that you want to grow properly, because otherwise it's spreading its nutrients too much, right? So I can see again how that would allow an Age of Plenty to happen, but again, I still think it's not going to happen straight away. Like, those things take time. When you prune a tree, that's for the next season. It's not for, like, right away usually, right? So that's, like, my reasoning behind it. But what do you think?
I think of there's a Muriel quote that comes to mind. He professes belief that, like, the land will flourish again if only you have faith. Here it is. My faith does not waver. The miracle rooted in these grounds will once again mend the world. And this time, its bounty will not be squandered. If you would be Elden Lord, tarnished, I hope that you too will share my faith. And I feel like and it's the middle sentence, and this time its bounty will not be squandered. It gives this idea of Muriel believing that the original Age of Plenty, which was expected to be eternal, they took it for granted. They didn't use it for what it could have been. So, his belief in mending the world, and if like the world were to flourish under a new age, then like it has this sort of optimism. Like, yes, the Age of Plenty will fade again, but there's a chance to make things better.
Yeah.
Of course, that's
no,
a personal
I
reading. I
yeah.
understand disagreement.
And the thing is that I think the funny part about this is I don't even necessarily think I disagree. I think the only difference is that I think that there's like a step of functionally, the way I see it, right, is that Elden Ring is kind of stuck in a perpetuality of like something. And if we think about it like the seasons, the way I'd see it is maybe not like entirely accurate, but like it's been in a winter for a while, right? But before you get to what I would consider the Age of Plenty, which is the summer, right, where you have your bountiful harvests and everything happening, maybe like an autumn kind of thing, more summer, I'd suppose. You need to have like a spring in order for things to begin regrowing. And so rather than it being like, oh, there's not going to be an Age of Plenty, I think there still would be. I just don't think it would start right away. But like on the time frames we're working at, I have no idea how long a Tarnished is going to rule for, or the Tarnished is going to rule for specifically. I have no idea how long it would take for that like rule to be changed or things to happen in that way, right? And we're working on like the Shattering. We have no idea how long ago that was in like any unit of time, right? And it's been Marika that entire time, and it's been Radagon as the Elden Lord that entire time. And so I think it's entirely reasonable that within the Tarnished rule, the Age of Plenty comes about. It won't be squandered. It like the faith will be returned to this land. Everything will begin to like regrow anew, and things will work out, right? I just don't think that it's going to happen right after we pick up the Elden Ring, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's understandable. Well, I think that's about it. I think one last thing I want to touch on, just because it ties into an episode that we'll probably release after this, or maybe after the episode after this, the one after this one. But it's that when you were describing the transition of Godfrey from going, like how he's built up over time, and then through the course of the fight we tear him down. There's this idea of it's called negredo in alchemy. It means black in Greek, and it comes from the steps of making the philosopher's stone or performing the magnum opus, which is like a thing in alchemical symbolism and whatnot. And in this process, you are essentially trying to purify a substance so that it can then be used in the future steps. And that is basically, that purification is stripping the essence down to its bare essentials. And if you were to compare this to what Godfrey is, it's you stripping him down to his bare essentials, which I think is a neat just thing to bring up in regards to that. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very neat.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me, Rach. Where can people find your content?
It has been a pleasure as always. As per usual, YouTube, RageIkari, same everywhere, pretty much. Yeah. Hopefully I'll have more content out by soonish.
I believe.
But yeah, it's been great. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, thank you as always for joining, and thank you listeners for listening. And leave your likes, comments, concerns, questions in the comments below. As always, I appreciate you. I also appreciate the moderators that are associated with the podcast, Agaric and Mogvfvb, as well as the subreddit for Elden Ring discussion, of which we are affiliated with. Go check them out, give them some love. And yeah, thank you as always for watching, and don't you dare go hollow on me.